Our second presentation this morning will build on the themes explored by Laura Lundy. We're going to hear about ways in which becoming rights respecting can support the inclusion of children generally, and particularly more marginalised children. In our theory of change for the programme, we state that being able to claim and enjoy their rights enhances children's sense of belonging to their school community. Is this true? We certainly hear such feedback on almost every school accreditation visit, but we wanted a more robust test, a more objective perspective. We were very fortunate to have the opportunity for rights respecting practice across the UK to be reviewed by the Professor of Child Rights at Strathclyde University, Carol Robinson. Carol's scrutiny of RRSA goes back a long way. In 2010, with a colleague, Judy Sebber, Carol conducted one of the earliest academic studies into the rights respecting programme. Her most recent research will be published in the coming months, but we're delighted today that Carol is joining us to share some of her initial findings. Again, please post questions in the Q&A. You can find a link hopefully in the bar at the top of your screen, and Kathy will be back once again to explore some of your questions with Carol at the end of her presentation. So Carol, Professor Carol Robinson, you're really welcome. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Over to you, Carol. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for the introduction. So yes, I'm going to talk about some research that is almost complete but still underway, but we hope to complete this within the next month or so. It was a project funded by the University of Strathclyde. They obviously, because of my title, Professor of Children's Rights, they understand my interest in children's rights, and they were delighted to fund this project, seeing the need for this work to take place. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so the project aims, what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at the impact of a rights respecting schools approach on schools' feelings of belonging and inclusion, the experience experienced by pupils within the education system. So how do pupils get that sense of belonging and inclusion? We're also concerned particularly with marginalised groups, although because of the nature of marginalised groups, they have been more difficult to reach, but I will talk about that. But we also wanted to consider, does learning about children's rights actually help children to develop a sense of belonging and inclusion? So that was part of the research as well. So there's only rights respecting schools included within the research, and we were particularly keen, does that approach actually help children to feel a greater sense of belonging and inclusion? Okay, next slide, please. So the data collection methods. I should say that the research started about October 2024, and as I say, we're very near the end of it now. But a starting point for the research was to talk to some pupils themselves. So we spoke to a group of pupil advisors. We wanted to seek their views on how they understood the terms belonging, inclusion and marginalisation. And that's been a starting point for a lot of the research to do, talk to the pupils themselves. How do they understand these terms? And then we also wanted to find out from these pupil advisors, if they were conducting this research, what sort of questions would they put in a survey for pupils and for teachers? So what type of questions do they think should be used to address the study aims? So that was our starting point. We then spoke to 15 UNICEF rights respecting school professional advisors and to some rights respecting school leads from gold schools. We asked for leads from gold schools because we wanted to speak to people who'd been through the system, if you like, and who'd reached the gold level. And we asked them the same questions. How do they understand belonging, inclusion and marginalisation? And also, what factors support people to develop these senses of belonging and inclusion? And what sort of questions should we include in the survey for teachers and for pupils? So it was kind of this developmental process with the data collection, starting with the pupils, then the rights respecting schools advisors and the school leads. And then we wrote the survey that was intended for children aged 9 to 16-year-olds, then a separate survey, but aligned similar questions for teachers. And the survey was then distributed to a range of schools across England, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and the Channel Islands. It's probably worth saying that just over half of the responses, 53% of responses, came from gold schools, but of course the rest were from a mix of other schools. And we had 420 pupil responses and 87 teacher responses. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about the findings here, but before I kind of go into detail about the findings, I think it's worth saying that children's understanding of school belonging and inclusion, they came out as different ideas. Belonging, these are actually quotes here from pupils, belonging was more of an emotional feeling about how people felt, whether they felt the school accepted them as a person. So it was an emotional feeling, whereas they said inclusion was a physical thing. It's about what schools put in place to help you feel you belong. And belonging was produced through inclusion. So I think that's a good starting point to understand how students themselves saw inclusion and belonging. And that was reiterated over and over again in the various groups that we spoke to. And next slide, please. So what were the people saying then? And this is a mixture of responses from talking to pupils and from the survey responses. And I've just put in brackets the age range of the pupils who responded so that you get a mix of those age ranges. So firstly, factors associated with a sense of belonging. This was very much a feeling of fitting in and being an established member of the school community. It was being able to relate and have shared interests and understandings with adults and peers in school. So you felt you are part of something. I think as one person said, you feel part of the jigsaw. So you really feel part of something. You also, that was significant of belonging, was feeling wanted, liked, cared for, and having mutually trusting relationships with adults and peers. So it's having these close friendship groups where you feel part of a friendship group, and where you had trusting relationships with other teachers and with peers. So you felt you could trust people in school, and where the trust wasn't there, pupils didn't feel that they belonged. So it was this trusting, valued, cared for relationship. And then the third point was having a voice and feeling safe to voice opinions and feeling listened to by adults and peers. So more than just having a voice and feeling that you're listened to, actually what was crucial here was feeling safe to voice opinions. And when you feel that you want to be heard, people want to listen to what you have to say. And aligned to this was feeling unjudged and safe to be oneself. And again, this relates to kind of an emotional feeling, it's emotional safety, where pupils know they won't be ridiculed, they won't be laughed at, or they won't be hurt emotionally. So they feel unjudged and confident that regardless of any unique characteristics they have, they will be respected by adults and peers. So what came out more probably from this research than any previous research is this feeling safe and having a voice. That was definitely key within all of this. And of course, I've spoken about these as individual aspects, but they are interrelated. They can't be almost one without the other. But they were the factors associated with school belonging. Next slide, please. So the factors associated with school inclusion, there are four main factors here. One, that adults in school demonstrate recognition, acceptance and accommodation of people's needs and preferences and values. And this for things like running school clubs with specific pupils in mind. Pupils also mentioned they liked at times having the teacher setting classroom seating plans, which actually is a bit controversial to what's been said previously. But where pupils like that, and this is where maybe some of the marginalised children come in, they said they felt comfortable then that the teacher would put them next to somebody who would get on well with them and they would feel included. So they actually, the children who are more likely to feel marginalised felt that this was helpful to them. The second point was adults implement strategies to encourage pupils to connect and communicate with each other. Again, aligned to that first point, but This was especially where pupils felt at risk of being left out. They felt there were play buddies there that they could go to. So where there were strategies that school had, buddy benches, play buddies, that sort of thing, that's helped pupils to feel included. The third point here is adults treat all pupils fairly and ensure they have equal access to opportunities. And what pupils felt strongly here was about school rules being applied equally and pupils not being favoured above others, so that they could see that no matter who that person was, the school rules would be applied equally to them, and pupils having equal access to opportunities. And again, what came out here is maybe in some cases pupils who'd be considered marginalised, whether that could be because of some educational needs, some special needs that they have, or because of some of other unique characteristics, but actually that they had equal opportunities to participate. And in some cases, it was clear that pupils clearly understood that this meant sometimes more attention needed to be given to these pupils, or specific things need to be put in place for these pupils to enable them to have equal access. So being treated fairly didn't mean being treated the same. And the fourth point here was people support each other to have opportunities to participate in activities outside of the classroom. And this is when they felt that they were able to join in games during break times and participate in extracurricular activities, and that other pupils supported them to do that and made them feel welcome there. So huge overlaps with belonging and inclusion, as you'd maybe expect, but also some differences and some nuances within each of these. Next slide, please. As far as feelings of marginalisation go, this also was described as an emotional feeling where people felt excluded or left out, and there were three factors, main factors here. One was feeling different to others, and this was really the most prominent feature of marginalisation, feeling different to others. The second was feeling unaccepted, victimised or discriminated against, where you're not seen as equal to others. And then thirdly, feeling socially excluded, left out, unaccepted or not good enough. And feelings of marginalisation, they kind of came into two categories as well. They were either self-imposed, where pupils actually almost had these inner feelings of feeling marginalised because of who they were or how they felt others thought about them, but they didn't have any evidence as such, it's just what they thought others thought about them. But there's also marginalisation because of the action that teachers or other adults in school or pupils took that led to pupils feeling excluded or marginalised. So I thought that's an interesting one where pupils themselves said, well, it was a bit kind of what they think others think, rather than be able to articulate why they felt or what has happened to make them feel marginalised. Next slide, please. So this table here, it shows pupils' responses to the statement, I feel like I belong, according to the school's right to respect and school level. And I've highlighted a few figures there. So I'll just give you a minute to look at a few seconds to look at the table. So what you might expect with the right to respect and school awards scheme is this beautiful, incremental increase from registered to gold, but we don't see that. So we thought, okay, what's going on here? Because with registered, we've got 72% of pupils in registered schools saying they feel like they belong. It then reduces as we go through bronze and silver and goes back up when we get to gold. So what's going on? And similarly with registered, 9% of people say they don't belong. That increases as we go through to bronze and silver and then goes right back down to 3% as we go to gold. And what the initial conversations with teachers and pupils are saying what's happening is when pupils are in a registered school and they're just starting their right to respect and school journey, they feel this sense of belonging, but actually, and many of the aspects that go with belonging, they feel the school does well. But as they understand more about their rights and understand more about what belonging could look like and what aspects of belonging could look like, they become more critical. And so they actually adopt a critical approach when they get through bronze and silver. But by the time they reach the gold school RSA, they actually have almost this more definite sense of feeling of belonging, where they understand more about belonging, understand more about the aspects of belonging, and that it's a more of a confident feeling of belonging. So although the 73% in gold and 72% in registered, actually people were saying about, I feel more confident I belong now. I feel more confident that there's aspects of the school that cover what I need. So I feel I belong. That obviously needs digging into further, but we just had to look at that given the outcomes of the survey. Next slide, please. So on the survey, there were several questions around aspects of belonging and inclusion and marginalisation. And things like teachers are interested in me, pupils respect each other, and pupils graded yes, sometimes no, etc. And we found a significant statistical association between pupils who reported feeling like they belong and feeling each of these variables here. Apart from, I'll talk about this bottom two in red in a minute. Where there's a G in brackets, so the top ones, where there's a G in brackets, what that refers to is pupils in gold schools were the most likely to agree with this statement and the least likely to disagree. So there was a definite difference between the gold school responses and other school responses. So they were more likely to think teachers were interested in them and the least likely to think teachers were not interested in them. So similarly with pupils respecting each other, pupils feeling proud of who they are, pupils feeling their needs were met so they can join in at school, pupils feeling their school makes an effort to include all pupils, pupils feeling different cultures and backgrounds are celebrated, and pupils feeling different abilities and talents are celebrated. Where there were two kind of discrepancies, which I'm pointing out here in the red, were that adults listen to their views and their rights are respected by adults in school. So 71% of registered schools, of pupils in registered schools, said adults listen to their views, and 66% of pupils in gold schools did. So obviously a drop there. However, it's worth mentioning that pupils in gold schools were the least likely to report that their views were not listened to. And similarly, with the rights are respected by adults, 84% of pupils in registered schools thought they were, and 83% in gold schools. But again, gold schools were the least likely to report their rights weren't respected. And these two, the points in red, again, speaking to pupils, it is something about them starting to be more critical about how they view being listened to, and their right to be listened to and their right to have their rights respected. They understood more what that meant as pupils progressed through from registered to gold. And actually, the listening to all pupils and the views of all pupils at all times is almost impossible for anybody working with children. So the pupils in gold schools were being, in a way, very critical that they felt they weren't listened to at all times about everything, because that was an expectation that went with having that right. So again, it needs digging into a bit further, but these were the initial findings. Next slide, please. So the impact about learning about rights, we divided that into two areas, the school-wide impact and the impact on pupils individually. So we asked people specifically, and it was an open-ended question in the survey as well as in the interviews with young people. We asked them, does learning about rights help you to feel different? Does it make you feel different about the school and about your school experiences, sorry? And also we asked them specifically, does it help with feelings of belonging? And what the answers they came up with, as I say, divided into two areas. One about the school-wide impact, which also influences feelings of belonging and inclusion and marginalisation, but secondly about the pupils individually. So the school-wide impact. A lot of this we sort of knew already, but they've added to what we know by their comments. So this whole school community has a shared knowledge of children's rights. That's something that we'd maybe expect, certainly with the gold rights to respect in school. But what pupils were saying is, it's this unifying by people learning about rights, they feel unified within the school. They feel it brings the school together, and that's helped with inclusion, and it reduces marginalisation. And of course, it also formed the basis on which foundational and shared understandings of the concepts of fairness, equity and equality were built. Secondly, school policies and practices aim to create an inclusive environment. And pupils could see this, they could see the policies and practices that did that. Policies and practices around, say, acknowledging and celebrating diverse cultures and religions, identities, unique characteristics, those sort of celebrations, that all helped with inclusion and then had a knock-on effect with feelings of belonging to, and of course, reducing marginalisation. Thirdly, a school ethos grounded in rights, respect and values. Again, it's something you'd maybe expect and something we knew, especially in Gold schools. But when pupils learn about their rights and the rights of others, that this did support that development of a school ethos grounded in rights, respect and values, and pupils were saying that. And then the shared rights, respect and language. So when pupils understand their rights and those of others, and they can articulate their rights in their views, in a rights, respecting way, this enabled challenging issues to be approached in a constructive way through consistently referencing rights and considering and respecting the rights and dignity of themselves and others. So they were the main school-wide impacts. Next slide, please. So the impact on the pupils themselves. So aligned with learning about rights, unifying the school, people said that when everybody learns about rights, they feel united, and through the whole school learning the same thing, but actually through knowing that all pupils in the school share the same rights. So where people feel that everybody had the same rights and everybody knows each other has those rights, they feel united, they feel as one. Secondly, it helped them realise they have a right to an education. And having an awareness of education as a right, rather than something granted to them, support pupils to develop that sense of belonging and inclusion. Because they had that right to be there. It wasn't somewhere they just had to go every day because they're told to be there. They have a right to an education. And especially when pupils mention that not everybody has this right in the world, and I suppose with what's on the news at the minute, they will know a lot of children across the world don't have this right to an education. It's not upheld. They have the right, but the right isn't upheld. Pupils have an increased self-respect and self-confidence. And that's through knowing that rights are unconditional and apply to all children. That give people that confidence. And there's a lovely quote from a pupil who said, "I feel like I have meaning when I have rights." And I just thought that was extremely powerful. That came from a primary school pupil just very recently, which is why it's not on the slide, but I thought it was a beautiful quote. And it captured so much of what's been said to us. So next slide, please. So also people feel that they have an increased understanding of the rights and the needs of others. This kind of through known rights that they could understand, and that led to a great acceptance of others. Also, people feel empowered to express feelings and to advocate for themselves and others. And this was an outcome of knowing and understanding about rights, knowing they have a right to have a say in matters affect them, and having a shared right to respect and vocabulary and language through which to articulate their opinions. So this kind of, it came together, knowing about rights and knowing how to articulate those rights in a rights respecting way, and they could articulate their views in that way. So that was empowering for pupils. Pupils have a sense of agency through knowing that their rights can't be taken away. That empowered pupils. And they know, for example, they have a right to their chosen religion, and that can't be taken away. So they felt this increased sense of agency. And this all helped with aspects of belonging and inclusion and reducing marginalisation, because there's a sense that other pupils respected what different people brought to the school. And having an increased sense of safety. And there's this feeling that when people know about rights and understand that all children have rights, this creates a school environment where children feel safe, as they know school's a place where they are valued and where their rights will be respected. Next slide, please. I just want to talk briefly, in the few minutes left, about the challenges associated with ensuring all pupils develop a sense of belonging and inclusion. Because there are, of course, challenges, huge challenges that schools face, and amongst all the other challenges in their day-to-day running. And school non-attendance is becoming a bigger issue here. And school non-attendance, of course, it's difficult to reach children, and it's difficult then, especially to reach marginalised children. But the school non-attendance due to parents or carers not valuing education was significant. As schools were talking about several calls to schools, calls to parents, emails to parents, calls at parents' at houses, and no response. So how can they help children to feel included if there's actually no response? So parents and families not valuing education. Children often preferring the comfort of their own home as a result of maybe feeling anxious about coming to school, so they don't attend school. In many cases, parents encouraging children to remain at home because they wanted their company. And it seems that from the research, non-attendance is particularly prevalent as a transfer to secondary school, with the outcome that a lot of pupils don't successfully make that transition. And of course, once they don't attend school in the first few months of secondary school, it's more difficult to get them into school. Influences from outside school often negatively impact on people's acceptance of diversity, and that had a huge impact on helping pupils to feel belonging and included, and it served to marginalise groups or individuals. They may come with preconceived ideas from their family and make comments to pupils, and that had an impact. Also, a lack of awareness by staff and pupils of the needs of some minority groups. And this isn't at all a blame on people. It's actually, there are so many groups to deal with, and a lack of training and a lack of time, that teachers were saying, we don't have time to understand everybody's individual needs. So there were some cases, I'm not saying children were feeling marginalised, but it was difficult to help children feel a sense of inclusion, belonging, where people didn't understand their needs because of the increased variety of needs of people's needs. And a tokenistic approach to supporting inclusion and participation of some pupils was also a factor that didn't help in the sense of helping children to feel belonging and included. This is where the examples given of where policies were maybe ad hoc or add-ons rather than being fully integrated into the school culture. So maybe like a one-off assembly to celebrate some religions, but then that's it. That's all that is there. So it's not really embedding children's identities into the school. And also examples were giving sometimes of pupils feeling schools concentrated their effort on including certain groups and backgrounds and overlooking the others. So some people felt that the inclusion of some individuals was prioritised above others. And occasionally unconscious bias from staff and pupils was mentioned, leading to marginalisation of some pupils. And that could be things like talking about family, where maybe the child is in a looked after situation or doesn't have a stable family. It could be talking about perceived academic ability and putting expectations on a pupil, or lack of expectations because of perceived lack of ability, or in some cases teachers having favourites, maybe who they felt were more similar to themselves. So this kind of unconscious bias which pupils saw led to some pupils feeling marginalised. I have whizzed through that, and I think I've got 1 minute to spare, so apologies for the speed of it. I hope it's all made sense to you. I hope it's been interesting, but thank you.
Thank you, Carol. That was brilliant. And that was the first time I've seen any of these findings from your research. And it was just so interesting, the correlations that we see when we're in school, and bringing that to life. I think kind of the sense of those results from your survey dipping and coming back up again. I think we've definitely got that sense through the work that we do with schools as well, but it's really interesting just to have that external view and really kind of, we'll be spending lots of time when you share with us the final research and in thinking about that and questioning that, definitely, and looking at how this supports us. And I'm sure the schools, we've got rights respecting schools watching at the moment, they'll see correlations with their practice and see that, find those resonations as well, which is absolutely fantastic. We do have a few questions, and we've got a few minutes to cover those, which would be lovely if that's all right, Carol. But yes, I'd really like to explore first with you that sense of the evidence around thinking about that sense of belonging, and obviously that's really, really important, and it was lovely to see that equality, equity, those kind of, all of that comes into play, and having those definitions from the children themselves was really lovely, and exploring that deeper will help us develop the programme, definitely. But did you see any evidence that that sense of belonging in a rights respecting school translates into an impact in attendance or behaviour? Did that come through or not at this point?
We didn't look at that specifically, so we didn't take it, because with the schools it was, I should have said, the survey was anonymous, so we don't know who responded. We had no, we wanted it that way, so we had no way of knowing. But having said that, having spoken to some the teachers in schools and some school leaders, it is coming. They are saying that attendance, certainly exclusions were dropping, and the need to feel like they want to exclude was definitely falling, certainly as students got to schools got to the gold levels. So that was a definite that came over, although I don't have statistics to prove it, sort of thing, but it's certainly been said. And pupils themselves were saying that they understood more about the needs of others, and they understood, what do they call it? Dysregulation. That was a term that was used when they say when other students dysregulate, we understand why that happens. So they don't respond or react to it. So that was kind of leading to more positive school environment, I suppose.
Definitely, yeah. So that sense of inclusion in the classroom, and thinking about that, definitely. Yeah, so I think there were quite a few questions trying to think about that attendance and that sense of belonging linked to attendance, but that's maybe something we can follow up with and have a think about. Someone's asking, did you carry out any research on schools that haven't taken part in rights respecting schools? And you didn't, did you? But
no, I didn't.
What was the reasoning for that?
Yeah, well, money. I should say. Well, yeah, I mean, Strathclyde University funded it, which is very good of them, but there's a limited budget. But no, I mean, I could see that would have been brilliant to have done non-rights respecting schools, would have just been perfect. But funding is an issue. That was the reason.
No. There's also another question actually about your survey, is do you have a list of questions that you asked on the survey? Is that something that you will share as part of the final research?
Yes, they'll be in the report, yes.
Yeah, brilliant. No, because I think people are interested in the kind of questions that have informed your findings. So that would be great. There's another question as well coming up, and thinking about how did you pick up a sense when talking to children about how rights have impacted on their lives outside of school? Because as becoming a rights respecting school, we always start with that in school and children learning about rights and rights of everyone within school, and then we look out to the community and the wider world. And did you pick up a sense that their rights are impacting positively outside of school?
A bit. I think it's probably a fair answer there. There certainly is a difference being made, and certainly as schools progress to silver and gold, but that was also a challenge for schools. But people did talk about it. What people talked about was as well, when they go out, if their family, that their brothers and sisters, siblings were in the same school and they understood rights, etc., that they felt that was more likely to have an impact in the home. If there was just more than the one person. But also there were a lot of comments like, oh, well, my cousin doesn't go to a rights respecting school, their school's so different. But so there was also a sense outside of school, within the same friendship groups, they followed this idea of rights respect, they understood that. But I didn't feel that it would spread across a community. And certainly schools talked about some communities being extremely difficult to reach.
Yeah,
But
and I think we talk to
schools
schools
try-
all the time about supporting,
Yeah.
kind of looking outward, and it is really challenging, isn't it? And there's so many influences in communities, but the more schools we get involved, the better, I think. More schools, more people are talking about rights is definitely kind of fantastic for that, isn't it? Spreading the word and just understanding.
Yeah. I mean, there were some schools that I'm thinking about. I mean, I was just thinking about anecdotal evidence and think what people were saying. Some schools were saying, one school said that, you know, when we reached out to one parent who wasn't really engaged with the school, but they knew that they were having problems financially, so they spoke to the parent about the rights of the child to good health and good diet, etc., and then direct them to a food bank, and actually that brought that parent in, because that parent then felt that trusting relationship with the school. So there's some individual cases where reaching out to families and bringing the families in, and then that spread across that community, if you like, with those people in similar positions. So there were some really positive stories, but there were small groups rather than reaching a whole community.
Yeah, no, fantastic. They're great. They're great examples. We've got another question, just thinking about that inclusion and that the examples that you picked up, many of them were beyond the classroom, say in the playground or lunchtime, and those kind of more relaxed times in school. Do you think that inclusion outside the classroom plays a greater role in belonging than what happens inside the classroom? Or do you think, how do you feel about that? What came from the children?
I don't know about more. I don't play a greater role, but certainly really, really important. Where people said they felt school clubs were made just for them, where they felt that teachers, adults in schools had time to talk to them and just spend time with them outside of school time because they wanted to hear what they said. That was certainly came over as, you know, I feel important here, I feel I belong here.
Yeah.
But I think being in the classroom, what was important was feeling that everybody had an equal amount of attention, or not necessarily equal amount of attention, had the attention if they needed the attention. And some people's were certainly, as I say, school rules implemented fairly, that came over really strongly. And feeling that teachers didn't prioritise groups over others. But again, that kind of relates back to understanding people themselves, understanding children with different needs and how that's supported, because then that didn't necessarily take a lot of the teachers' attention, because pupils weren't making situations worse, if you like, by their reaction.
Yeah, so that creating that sense of understanding that fairness isn't about equality, it's about equity as well, and how all children have that right to an education, and we support children in different ways to access that education.
It's probably worth saying that marginalisation was more of a factor outside of the classroom. So helping children not to feel marginalised outside the classroom. And this was primary and secondary. So having people to play with, having people to be with during break and lunch times. And where they didn't, they felt really isolated and marginalised. So that was a really important part of when it comes to marginalisation.
Brilliant, thank you. One final question before we finish up, but were there any elements of that sense of belonging or inclusion that surprised you that children were talking about? Was there anything that you hadn't thought of before or hadn't come across?
I think what came out more strongly this time than ever before was, I think, like I said, was the feeling safe to voice opinion and having and that was, I know voice has always been important and it's always been an area of my work, but it's this sense from the pupils how important it was to feel safe to say, but also what I've found as well with speaking to people more than's happened before was the confidence people's had that they have a right to do this, and actually I'm gonna say what I think because I have that right, and I have a right to be respected, and that came over probably more strongly than it ever has done.
It's that sense of communication, the voice, and from what you were saying as well, that RRSA came through, that the language that rights brings to be able to express themselves and to understand challenging situations, and I think that's lovely to hear, and we're super excited to find out more. Definitely.
RRSA was actually mentioned by some teachers and school leaders. RRSA was mentioned as something that they thought was important, and I'm kind of exploring that a bit further because that's come up enough times for me to think, okay, this is there's something here.
Brilliant. It's something that we do here when we visit schools as well, so it'll definitely be interesting. Someone's also asked in the chat about kind of, is there a plan to look more deeply into the idea that pupils are becoming more critical of how schools are respecting their rights as they go through the journey. And I don't know if you've got plans. I think it'd be something that we will want to do as a programme moving forward from this, and look into definitely at those patterns, and obviously kind of the depth of understanding that children build over the time in a rights respecting school.
I mean, that won't be part of this project because it won't be time, and it's kind of just come out since we've analysed the surveys. I think, okay, but it really has raised a question about what does this really look like? As I say, I've just had a few initial conversations, but not any in-depth research around this. But I think it's certainly something worth exploring further for yourselves to know, because it's important. What is going on there? But it's something about this criticality become more, which is a good thing, become more critical and questioning more. But almost for schools to expect this to happen.
And when we're asking them to do surveys at different stages on their journey, which we do as well, to maybe kind of set that expectation that it might not all head towards the sky, but actually, and I think it really resonated with me around that sense of voice that you were talking about, that sense that actually children might at the start of this journey feel listened to, but over the time and becoming a gold school, they can see that their voice can really influence change and influence decision making to a different level, and that recognition lets them reflect and go, well, actually, maybe I wasn't listened to in the way that I could be, and this is what's happening now. And I think it's lovely that they can be so reflective on that as well, and really it'd be definitely something to take forward. So we've got two things to take forward from both of us, because this one of which has been fantastic, but it just brings so much kind of thinking, so much reflection onto what we do, and it hopefully will really kind of help us all become more empowered in the way that we think about the programme, and in influencing change in education and moving forward, and really spreading the word about this. So we'll look forward to your research and taking that forward.
I think one final note is probably worth me saying, this how the learning about rights unified the school. I think that was another thing that came up, that the children themselves saying they felt a sense of unity and belonging. That's something that hadn't come up before. So I think that's probably worth ending on that positive note as well.
Lovely. Thank you, Carol. It's been lovely to have you here. Thank you so much.